Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of the Author Talk series. Once again, a huge thank you to the St. Petersburg Press for sponsoring this series. We truly appreciate all your support. And for today's talk, we have an amazing author, and he's also the executive director of the Palladium in St. Pete, Mr. Paul Wilborn. I think he's been on our series before, so it's great to have him back. And today he will be talking about his latest book called The Florida Hustle. So welcome back, Paul. How are you today? Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm glad this worked out, and the technology seems to be working. So we're all here. I'm excited about it, and love talking about this book. It's freshly new. It's just out, and we're really getting ready to take it around the state of Florida and then around the country. So great
Oh,
time to
wow.
talk about it.
That's great. Let me see. Where's the mouse? Technical difficulties.
And I'm happy to answer that first question, which is on my screen.
Oh, okay, cool.
So if you want me to just launch into that, I don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead. So yeah, tell us a little more about your book. I read a summary of the story and it sounds very interesting. It seems like a typical, mystery horror story with a little bit of comedy mixed in. So, but what's the real storyline of this book?
Yeah, and actually, I want to kind of stress that it's actually not really much of a mystery, and it's not really horror in that sense. It's more of a coming of age comic novel, but it's set in the world of 80s slasher movies. And what's fascinated me about it was that when I was just out of college, a lot of my actor friends who came out of college were in slasher movies, bad ones, shot in the woods in Florida, and they all were killed by some anonymous, slasher in a hockey mask or something. So this is set in real Florida history and actual film history. So that's the setting, but nothing really horrible happens in this book. There's not mutilated bodies or anything like that. Let me just read this little intro to you because I worked really hard on this, and I think it tells the story. It happens in 1982, and aspiring filmmaker Michael Donnelly is obsessed with Dawn Karsten, a teenage scream queen known for dying horribly in a string of cheap slasher flicks. Michael believes Dawn deserves better material and that he's just the man for the job. But obsession like filmmaking is a risky business. To Dawn and her LA manager, Michael's storyboards rendered in blood red ink look more like death threats than movie pitches. And Dawn's new movie is called Swamp Fiend 2, and they're about to shoot in the Everglades 1 hour from Michael's house. And all of those things sort of set the plot in motion. Michael ends up leaving his house with a detective on his tail, and he's trying to get to the Swamp Fiend set to meet the love of his life, who he wants to make a big star. So it's a fun comic premise, and it really tells the story of Florida in the 80s in many ways. And Florida is a state that was just about to burst and become a big state at that time. And so it's a lot of fun, and it will appeal to horror fans, but it's not really a horrible book. It's a fun book that all kinds of folks will enjoy, I think.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah. So tell us a little more about the characters in the book, like Michael and Dawn.
Sure. What I was living in Los Angeles when I started this. This started as a screenplay. I had another story optioned in Los Angeles as a screenplay, and I was out there playing that crazy game, and and I was thinking about what would happen if everyone thought my protagonist was going to do something horrible, but really he just wanted to make better movies. And it was kind of a fun idea. And where this book is set, Shivani, everyone's too young to remember this, but in 1981, there was a crazy guy named John Hinckley who tried to kill President Reagan and actually wounded him, and because he was obsessed with Jodie Foster, a film star. And so my thought was, what if you had this character who was obsessed with a film star, but he really didn't want to hurt anybody? But no one realized that. So that was sort of the germ of the idea. And then I needed some characters around him. Obviously, Dawn, the idea, my wife is an actor, and it turned out has been very successful in recent years. But her first movie was, of course, the requisite vampire movie that was supposed to go straight to video, and then it got bought, and then it got reshot, and she's in some movie that she doesn't even have an idea. Well, that's that world, and Dawn is sort of the young actor in that world, wishing she could get a break and get to a better movie. One of the fun things in researching this book was my wife was shooting The Conjuring 3, which is a $40 million picture. She was the villain in The Conjuring, and I was on the set, and I got to ask everybody, tell me about your worst movie experience, your worst trailer you were ever in, the worst food you were ever served. And everybody had those stories because they all started in those kind of horrible B movies. So it was fun. And there are lots of major characters in here that kind of interact, but the other one is a guy named Kavanaugh Riley, and he's 65 years old when this book happens, and that makes him a World War II vet in 1982. And was a very brilliant man. He actually was based on a real character that I wrote about as a journalist. And at a certain point in his life, he abandons his family and ends up living on the street, and falls in love with young girls who kind of work the streets there. And he was a brilliant guy, and he turned out to be a great character for this book because he takes Michael under his wing and helps him get there. But Michael doesn't realize he's also trying to hustle him for his own purposes. So that's the sort of why the title is Florida Hustle.
Yeah, that's wow. I mean, I think you sort of answered my next question, which was, are these characters inspired by people you know or have met in real life, or are they purely fictional? So that was, you killed two stones with one bird.
That's right. And I'll answer that a little more broadly, because there are two of the key characters who in this book, Lola Famosa and Jaime. What's Jaime Solano? I believe his last name. Are both Cuban refugees, and this is set in South Florida, so it makes a lot of sense to have folks from Cuba as part of the story. But when I was in school, so many of my classmates were young Cuban refugee kids whose families had come over. And so I really know those people, and I know that world. None of them are based on actual characters, but I knew this, and my family were Italian immigrants from a few years earlier. So I really knew the refugee story, and that plays out as well. The sort of immigrant story, the family struggling to make it, and the kids sort of living under that shadow. So those were some of the other characters. All my characters are fiction. Kavanaugh is the closest one to a real character.
Wow, that's great. So, but why did you specifically choose to set the backdrop of the story in Florida? I mean, there are like a lot of places in the US, obviously, a lot of states where a story like this could take place, but why specifically like Florida and the Everglades and Palm
Sure.
Beach?
Well, the first lesson of writing to me is write what you know. And if you're a writer out there, I say that's the biggest thing you can do, is write what you know. And my first job was in West Palm Beach around this time. And my brother lived on Palm Beach. He came and lived with me for a while. Then he lived on Palm Beach for about 5 more years. I know that world really well, and especially from that period. And a few years later, I was a reporter for both the Tampa Tribune and the St. Petersburg Times. And my job was roaming around Florida, finding great stories and telling them. And so every place we go to in this book were places that I visited personally. I fictionalized them somewhat, but so I'm writing what I know. I was there. I know this world. There's a sleazy motel that Michael flees to in downtown West Palm Beach, which doesn't even exist anymore. Downtown is so gentrified now. But in those days, downtown was pretty empty and sleazy. and my first night at my job, I stayed in this motel for lack of any place else to stay. And I had to be at work at 5 in the morning. Well, when I went to bed at 10, it was very quiet. When I came out about 4 in the morning, the joint was jumping. It was like the no-tell motel of West Palm Beach. So that motel appears in this story just because I was there and I know what it looks like and feels like.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you should always, write a story on a place that, you're more familiar with, because then you can develop the story better and the characters better. And, so yeah, that's great. And as I also read about you that you are a pianist and a singer, and you also had led several bands, like you had your own band called Paul Wilborn and the Pop Tarts, which was
True.
really fun and creative name. I like that name. And also Blue Roses.
Hmm.
And you even produced the American Songbook series at the American Stage in St. Pete. So how did you, get interested in music and singing?
I've always been interested in it. My family was musical. My brother really pursued it as a career. He was a Broadway singer, and then later he toured the church. He was a touring church singer and toured some of the biggest churches in America. And he's a real pro. I was always a better writer than I was a musician, but I could do it pretty well. And so I always loved making music and playing piano. And I had real good ideas of what I wanted a band to be. So I put my own bands together, and we've made, I've always been professional. We've made money, but I never saw myself at a Grammy Awards, if you know what I mean. I think as a writer is sort of my strongest suit, but I still do music. I still play every day. My wife and I perform together at times. That American Songbook series, she was part of it with a small band that I did. And it's still a big part of my life, but it's like a really professional hobby, if that makes sense. And I love it. It gives me a lot of joy.
Yeah, that's cool. And I also, as you also mentioned, that used to be a journalist for, the Tampa Tribune, the St. Pete Times. And I also read that you used to work for the Associated Press
In
in
Los Angeles, yeah.
That's a really prestigious association to be a part of. But how did you get interested in journalism and writing and getting that opportunity to work for an association like the Associated Press?
Well, I think our aptitudes show up pretty early, and somehow in right before high school, I ended up, because of something I had written for a class, I ended up being assigned to the newspaper. And by my junior year of high school, I was the editor of the paper, and I was editor for 2 years, and I worked on the college paper all through college. And it was they paid you as much as working at a slinging burgers. And so it was great experience. And journalism has always just come naturally to me. Writing, I know how to lay out a paper. I produce magazines. It was just something that seemed to be my real strong point. And I never really thought about a different kind of career, because the career just kept opening up, and it was a lot of fun. I've been all over the world as a journalist, covered wars and fun things and inaugurations and just all sorts of events. And it was just a real joy to do. And so I missed that. About in 2003, I left the Associated Press and became the arts director for the city of Tampa. I moved back to my hometown and have been doing the arts since then. I've run the Palladium Theater, and it's great. It's a great business to be in, but I really missed my writing. And so starting, I guess, in 2017, I wrote my first book in 2 years there. And that, I didn't know if I could write fiction, but that book won the gold medal for fiction from the Florida Book Awards. So I said, I better write another one. So
Yeah, that's great. I also used to be the one of the editors for my school magazine and newspaper, and I've also sort of have been naturally a writer, so I can really relate to what you're saying and to your experience. But how did you go from being a musician to a writer? Like, what was that transformation?
well, I hate to talk about getting older, but the bands I had were so much fun. And I was a stand-up piano player. I had two female singers, and we called them the Pop Tarts. We called nicknamed Strawberry and Cherry. I mean, we had fun with that. And we ended up playing some of the biggest festivals and shows around the Tampa Bay area. We played around Florida. And at the end we would play for 3 hours, and I would dance for 3 hours. And when I moved back to town, we were asked to do a big reunion show, and we danced for 2 hours. And at the end of it, after playing for 2 hours and dancing, I said, I'm really tired. So maybe it's time to be a writer. I just get to sit down. So anyway, my music has been seeded since then. And I also fell in love with the American Songbook, which is sort of Gershwin and Cole Porter and a lot of that stuff, which is a little more cabaret style, and you could sit down and play it. But I always told stories, and I always researched my musical shows. And so I think that the writer in me has always been there. And it's really kind of come out more in the last 5 years or so.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, I think you already answered this question, but I was gonna ask you, what do you love more, being a musician or being a writer? But you already said you love being a writer.
I think it's my strength. I think, I love being a musician, but for my real talent, I think that is recognized and really can take me places is writing.
Yeah, I agree with that. So do you have any like upcoming projects or books that you're working on that you'd like to share about?
Oh, sure. It's I'm deeply in a new project, and for a while, this Florida Hustle took like 3 years, most of the COVID period to really finish. I had started it as a screenplay, and then decided after the first book that I would use that idea and make it a novel. And it took 2 years when I thought it was finished, and then I redid it for another year because I didn't think it was quite good enough. So once I finished that process, I said, I got to write something else. But I was exhausted. I mean, you know how you kind of get through with a project and you just have no juice left. And so I laid some groundwork for this book. It took a few months, and then ideas started to percolate. My mind recovered from all of that, and now I've got two projects going, but one is what I think will be a novella, which is maybe a 30,000 word novel, and that I'm at 22,000 words and counting, and so it might get longer than that, but it's a real fun novel, and it's set in back in Tampa, which I also know very well. It's my hometown, and set back in some of the period from my first book, though it could stand alone. But it's fun. The characters are fun. The story is just, you can always tell when you're excited about going to your computer. I find about an hour a day to write, and when I'm really going good, it's what I think about. I got to find that hour because I got some ideas I want to get down. So that's where we are right now, and it's fun.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, I look forward to hearing about that book whenever it's ready to go. So, well, I think those are all the questions I have for you today. So thank you, Paul, for joining us again on our series. And it was a pleasure getting to know more about you and your book. And we hope to have you again soon whenever your next book is ready.
I would love it. This was really fun and pleasant, and I got to do it right from my office here at the Palladium. So I appreciate you guys so much reaching out to me, and thanks. I look forward to doing it anytime.
Yeah, we'd love to have you again. And if you all are interested in purchasing Florida Hustle, it is available on the St. P Press website and on Amazon as well. And I think that's it for today. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.